the Panther clan, and I'm a grandmother, and I just became a great grandmother about 3 weeks now. And also I'm a enrolled member of the Miccosukee tribe of Indians, but my mother was also a member of the Seminole tribe. So I have relatives on both tribes here in Florida, and some Creek descendancy in my lineage. So, being Indigenous and growing up here, I think I'm very blessed and fortunate that our tribe lives out in the middle of the Everglades. So we, in a way, we've been kind of being out away from the urban areas for a long time, have been able to keep a lot of our traditions alive and our language alive, which how we are as an individual is we're raised in those beliefs that we're supposed to exist in harmony with creation. And also we believe that creator, when he created this creation and he created us, the two-legged animal, that we were supposed to help keep an eye and protect and help his creation flourish, and to also view all of creation around us as our relatives, whether it's the sky, the trees, the water, the air, all walks of life, that we're connected in some way. And this labyrinth to take care of the earth all together, all the matter where they reside, and the societies, because we're also taught back in creation, all of creation, and all the I'm going to say human beings, because in my language we say yatale. We don't have a direct word, but the closest is saying human being. I always say I'm a natural being in a natural world, because when you call yourself a human being, you kind of disconnect yourself from that natural world, and that's a big issue in today's society. But growing up from early infancy on, when our youth, we say that babies are born with a lot of knowledge, and they can still communicate when they're young with the elements around them. But if you don't foster that connection, over time they lose that connection. So we're taught from a young early on to keep that connection, and even as adults to foster that connection in our own generations. That being said, when creator created this planet, it was supposed to be a Garden of Eden, and with no sickness and no health issues, and to live in harmony and at peace, and to have everything at your fingertips, and not to have death. There wasn't supposed to be any disease. And through time, even the indigenous peoples living their lives kind of lost their way a little bit. And we're seeing that today. A lot of the elders in our tribe and other tribes are being reminded that we have to get back to who we were meant to be as a people, to care for creation, so that our shared peoples can start seeing that abundance of life again and flourish, not for only our people, but for all of creation. Because we're taught that the issues that you see going on Mother Earth around you, the polluting, the illness in the waters, the illness in the air, the illness on the land, when you see the algal blooms here in Florida, when you hear about in other parts of the states, United States, when you have a lot of earthquakes, when you have a lot of, I think now isn't one of the islands you have an issue with a volcanic eruption. And we say that, the world around you is a reflection of you. The illness inside of you is projected out into the world around you, and the creation absorbs that, and the sickness that you project out to the environment around you, the environment also becomes sick. So what you're seeing in the environment around you is a mirror reflection of yourself. So we're taught that, and seeing that, we're even ourselves, we're trying to remind and re-educate ourselves to ground ourselves back to who we were meant to be as a people, and also in our children, because now there's social media, they go to public schools, and even myself, I went to public school, but all this interaction with the cultures, you can tend to take on traits that other cultures have and and you can also have a tendency to have their beliefs become your beliefs. And myself growing up, I was always taught that you learn in the non-Indian school to learn to read and write so you can help protect our people. But when you come home, you leave that mindset at the door. And then when you come home, you speak your language and who you are as a person. Never take on someone's beliefs as your own, because then it'll take away from what Creator meant us to be. So today, even ourselves in the Miccosukee and the Seminole, we see a lot of our young people starting to take on ideals and beliefs.
All right, hold on. Oh, here she is.
Can you hear me now? Somehow I got muted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now, even today, because we have more of our young people trying to reconnect themselves and the language and learn the teachings that have been passed on from generations to generations, we're trying to stand up for the environment around us, for nature, and some of the issues that we have going on. Our historic homeland of the greater Big Cypress, we have a company that's trying to increase oil exploration in the Big Cypress National Preserve. And just this past Saturday, I was blessed to have a lot of individuals, tribal members from Miccosukee, Seminole, and also all walks of life show up to our weekend event to hike into the Big Cypress to see where that exploration is going to occur, and also to try to bring attention through the media and also through prayer to get those individuals to change their mindset to from using the natural resources for personal gain. And for us, our cultural history of who we are as a people and our ancestors. My own mother is laid to rest in the Big Cypress National Preserve. She's not in the we lay our loved ones out in the Greater Everglades. So we're worried that those areas that our ancestors are going to be disturbed. Also, there's historic sites that we still use for prayer and ceremonies. And one of those locations is going to be close to where we observe during those times of year that's important for us as the Miccosukee and Seminoles. And when we look at creation, do we really need to continue on that path that society, the majority of society is headed? And I think during these COVID times, a lot of more individuals are realizing we need to change how we exist as a people. And I think a great example, one of the waterways over there in Europe, I believe it was Italy and France, where because everyone was staying isolated and not traveling, and they weren't using those waterways excessively, the waters got clear. And you had more, I think, what was it, dolphins come into the area. And I have a friend that's in Rome, Italy, and she was posting pictures of how the wildlife was starting to come back and flourish because of lack of people. And even here, even without especially in the height of the pandemic, when you didn't have the airlines functioning, how quickly the air started clearing up. And, I would hope a lot of people will see that, yes, we were forced to change our activities because of COVID, but in a way, nature's trying to show you, if you give it the opportunity, it can heal itself. Just like your body, if you give your body the opportunity, your body can heal itself. And realizing that connection that we have to be, as a society, all of us, not just Indigenous people, we have to get back to who we were meant to be. And when I speak to other,
stop you for just a second and say, you've gone in and out a couple of times, so I'm going to suggest maybe you turn off your camera part and just talk, because that way I think your connection will be more stable.
Okay, so I'm going to stop video.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think we got 95% of what you said, but I just wanted to let you know that might stabilize it just a little bit.
Yeah, I tried to stop when I saw I lost camera, to try to pick up where I stopped, so that people wouldn't get lost. And I think it would be good, because I can field questions to kind of answer what people are curious about when it comes to how the Miccosukee and Seminoles exist in this world. Because we have no choice but to have our foot in both worlds, in the mainstream society and also in the culture of who our people are. And when you're growing up as a Miccosukee, we live and breathe who we are every day, and our beliefs who we are every day. And it's not one holiday a year, or it's not a weekend. We have to walk that walk. We can speak, but those words that we speak, we have to also walk those words. And I think there's a saying, practice what you preach. And being that example to our children, so that because if we don't give the future generations a path to follow in a healthy manner, in balance with nature and what Creator intended for us, if we don't give them that roadmap, they're going to be lost. We have a saying, to know where you're going, you have to know where you came from. And history is very important. And ours is an oral history. It's not a written history. So it's important that we always pass down our stories. And we have teaching stories that are meant to guide, in our decision making. And when we make our decisions of what we're going to do, we think about them a long time, because once you take an action, you can't undo it. You can't go backwards. You can only go forward. And we're always taught that the laws the Creator gave us to follow as a guide, they never change. They're for eternity. And that's very different than how other cultures are, because they're always updating their laws and always changing and always modifying their laws. For us, Indigenous law is set in stone. It's always what it's supposed to be. And that's kind of a hard balance that for our younger generations to understand, because they've been exposed to so much to other cultures, and they get lost and they don't know how they're supposed to be. And it's a stressful process to watch them go through that and to find their way back. And when we're trying to care for Mother Earth, we have to be able to hear her words. And the only way you can hear her words, because she talks to you every day, whether it's through the wind, whether it's through the water, whether it's through the trees, the plants, the soil itself, it continually speaks to you. But you have to be in balance with that and remember that language that it's speaking to you, and take the time to stop and listen to what it is. Because we have a saying, to heal yourself, you have to go back to nature. And that's a very true statement. Even for myself, I always have to periodically just disconnect from everyone and be alone in nature to reground myself, because we always are surrounded by death. The death of, we say, urban societies, the city dwellers, they live in a city of death. And because you live in a dead house, that what you live in a house that you killed something to build your house, whether it's a tree, whether it's the ground to make the cement. You drive on a dead road, that asphalt is dead, it's not alive. You drive a dead car, you're breathing in dead air through that AC. So you're always surrounded by death. And over time, that death that you surround yourself by starts to affect your soul. So you have to disconnect from that and come back to the living in the natural areas where you have the trees, you have the grass, you have the water, you have all the animals that are living, that's alive. So when you bring yourself back into those elements where there's life, your soul gets cleansed. But then you start that cycle again when you go back into the dead city and you live in death every day. That's why we say that our people say that's why there's so much depression and suicide and anger in the urban areas, because they're surrounded by death all the time and they're consuming death. They're breathing in death. So that's where that big disconnect is when we think of ourselves as human beings, that we're not a part of nature. If society would start realizing that they're a natural being in a natural world, and start bringing themselves back into the natural world and living in an existence where you're a part of life, then some of those issues over time, because it's a journey, it takes time to your soul starts to heal itself. I think it is a good time to if there's any questions.
Let me offer one, and then I'm gonna open it up to others, and I'll ask everyone if they would either raise their hand with like this, or with the green hand that's on your console. But I did want to spend just a little bit of time with what you're presently doing, which is trying to preserve the Everglades and the various issues that you're facing, both that you just were talking about earlier, with trying to extract oil from the land, and there's the water that is being poisoned, and so I guess I'm wondering today, as you look at your beliefs and your traditions, how you're facing some of these issues that are going on right now.
With the oil and with the water, when I go and I find myself having to learn the process that water management uses, that the states follow, having to actually read and educate. I'm not a scientist, but I find myself having to learn the how laws are created, how did they set their standards, what are their guidelines that they use, what is the process, and to learn how to fight something. And also finding out that when I don't like public speaking, but I've had to make myself attend meetings and speak, because it's my tribe at stake. It's the generations of, future Miccosukees and Seminoles that need a place to exist with clean water and clean air. And it's, even though I don't like to do it, and even though I don't like to write, find myself having to, write comments, write letters to officials, and attend these meetings. So, but when I speak, it's trying to educate them how our people importance of why we need clean water, why we need clean air. And also what I find when I attend these meetings, whether it's online or in person, there seems to be this still this mentality, even though we're in 2021, there seems to be this mentality that the Miccosukes and Seminoles can't make decisions for themselves, that other entities seem to know better than us, that they have to make those decisions for us because apparently we're not educated enough to make decisions for ourselves. That mentality still exists, even though we have some of Miccosukes with PhDs and bachelor's degrees. And my own daughter, is a paralegal, and she's studying to be a chiropractor. So, it's there's still this mentality that in the like in the United States, this mentality that even with the government, that they have to be the caretaker of the indigenous tribes, as almost as a father figure. And even in Florida, in some of the agencies, there still seems to be that mentality when it comes to Indian tribes, that um, that there's this view that, well, they're just Indians. We have to make those decisions for them because they don't know what's best for them. And in a way, it's kind of degrading, to our people. And even last year, when we were having severe flooding on tribal lands, and we were speaking to the Army Corps of Engineers and South Florida Water Management, and the tribe in this intergovernmental agency meeting that was being conducted via online, when the tribe was urging, our tribal lands are flooded, our tree islands are flooded, the animals don't have anywhere to go, for them to provide relief and open some of these gates to send the water into Everglades National Park to relieve the tribal reservation and tribal communities of water, to have, an agency, the Army Corps of Engineers and South Florida Water Management tell an Indian tribe that we can't open those gates because we have to protect the residents of Miami-Dade County. And I'm sitting there in the room, I'm like, okay, you just told me and my tribe that you have to protect the human life in Miami-Dade County, and you can't flood their communities because you have to protect their life. So you're going to keep the Miccosukee community flooded. So basically, you just told the Miccosukee tribe they're not people. When those and I don't think those agencies, when they make those comments, realize they're telling the Miccosukee tribe they don't consider them people. Because when you tell a tribe who is flooded and they're asking you for relief, but you state that you cannot provide them relief because you have to protect this other community and you can't flood them and you have to protect these people and it's protect life. You just told that tribe their life has no value. And that's what we face today. We still, there's still people who don't see that the indigenous people's lives matter just as anyone else's. There's some people that still don't consider us people. And that's very unfortunate. And that's what, when we go through these meetings, that's what we face. Even when we're trying to get government to government consultation and we give our comments, it's very frustrating when these government agencies tell us, we'll just take them into consideration. In other words, it's up in the circular file. Now we do get to the table, but we're still not being heard. We're just being, what's the word I'm looking for? Pacified, I guess. Just we should be happy that we're at the table. And our tribal waters, we're still getting a lot of pollution into tribal lands. And that's very frustrating for the tribe. For over 30 years, keeps telling the state, and we've sued over the water, and they're supposed to clean the water, but they're still sending polluted water into our tribal reservation lands and through our portion of the Everglades that our tribe overseas. And the main focus is just sending clean water into Everglades National Park, which is on the south side of the Tamiami Trail. And the tribe consistently is always persistent, trying to put the message forth that we want water clean when it's entering through our reservations and continues on, because it has to enter tribal lands to go south. It has to pass through our lands, but we keep telling them we want the water clean when it passes before it enters tribal lands and goes on to the national park. But the state still keeps insisting to use our tribal lands as their dumping zone to filter the water. So by the time it passes through tribal lands, it's cleaner when it gets to the park. So it's, in it, it happens to tribes, but it also happens to poor communities. There seems to be this mentality that it's okay to send polluted water to poorer communities. It's okay to send polluted water to indigenous communities. And that's where there's the social justice issue in the entire equation. And with the oil drilling, I think the application that was put in by Burnett Oil, because everyone's looking at Burnett Oil, but the Collier family, who Collier County is named after, they're the ones who own the mineral rights, and they lease out those rights to oil companies. Burnett Oil, thankfully, I learned today that because we did our demonstration on Saturday, and because we got on the news, we got on Week News on the West Coast, and also it was covered by the Naples Daily News, and the Sun Sentinel was supposed to write an article. I don't know if they did yet, because they contacted me for pictures and info. And because it made some type of headline, I understand today Burnett Oil reached out to the tribe to have an official meeting with them. I think if I didn't do what I did Saturday, and if all those concerned individuals did not show up, Burnett Oil wouldn't even have entertained speaking to the tribes. And their application, that was put into the Big Cypress National Preserve, I understand the Center for Biological Diversity and the National Resource Defense Council have sued over the issue, trying to stop it. And they've waited years to get documents. And even the application, even though it's supposed to be public information, the National Park Service that oversees the Big Cypress National Preserve, they're refusing to release those documents for the public to view as to what those applications actually entail, even though it's required by law to release those documents. So there's a lot of issues that we're trying to have to work with. And as an indigenous person, we're having to learn that process, how to navigate it and I understand, unless we sue for those documents to release, they're just going to keep breaking the law. And it's very frustrating.
Chris Kirchner, she wants to ask a question, but it was a curiosity as you were speaking. So that the surface land is the Miccosukees, the land, the ground, the land beneath the surface, the mineral rights belongs to someone else. Is that even on tribal lands?
In the Big Cypress, there's unless we get into a big legal battle, back in the earlier days before you and I were ever born, back during the Seminole Wars, to end the Seminole War, the United States government made an agreement with the tribes, and it's evolved over the years. It's called one version was called the Polk Agreement and the Worth Agreement. But basically, when they called that truce, all of Florida from south of Ocala to the edge to where Key West was all supposed to be Indian territory. And there's still language on the congressional books, a law that establishes Indian territory. It's still on the books, but nobody has used that to sue over it. So no one was supposed to ever inhabit South Florida except for the indigenous people. And over time, as settlers started moving into this area, when the indigenous people contacted the United States government, telling them, basically, hey, no, your people weren't ever supposed to cross this area. It was only supposed to be Indians. You need to come and remove your people. And the United States government had told the indigenous people, we don't have enough soldiers to send down there to remove, to evict those people or make them travel back north. So basically the government just ignored it and continued to allow all this encroachment into Indian territory. So basically Miami-Dade County, Collier County, West Palm Beach, they're all squatters on indigenous territory. So that's how we view it. That being said, with the creation of the Big Cypress National Preserve, in that enabling legislation that was codified and passed through law through Congress, within that language, continued to protect the indigenous territory of the Miccosukee people and their right to exist in those areas and use it for traditional use and access, to live off the land, to live, actually physically live in those areas, is in that language as well. So, but because all the squatters came into South Florida and started, and these counties were created, it basically selling land that they didn't have any rights to sell. You had the Collier family buy up a lot of land when the preserve was created. When the Collier family sold the land to the federal government to create the preserve, which I think, in my mind, the preserve was illegally established anyways, because they didn't have that right to do it on stolen land. But that's a whole nother story. But anyways, the Collier family retained the mineral rights under the land, and the federal government owns the surface of the land. So because and also in the enabling legislation, the Collier family, through their attorneys and lobbyists, were able to have in that enabling legislation for the creation of the preserve, that they were able to have oil production. I think it's 30% of the total amount of oil that they're allowed to access at any given time. It can only be 30% of that. And so the Park Service, because it's in that legislation, cannot prohibit the Collier family from accessing that oil, because it's in law that they're allowed to access that oil. So that's where we're at. But because the surface area still is Indian territory, there's that, I guess, a gray area that we're having issues with, because we see it's still our land. It's on congressional legislation established it as Indian territory, but they ignored it when they created the preserve. So unless we get into this big legal battle and drag out that agreement that the United States promised all of South Florida to the indigenous people, we're still we're going to be in courts back and forth and trying to educate people or try to come to compromises. Because if we drag out that agreement, because there's still indigenous descendants of both Miccosukee and Seminole who still have Aboriginal title rights to South Florida. And I don't, at this point in time, how many millions of people do we want to evict? How many legal battles would we have to fight to get rid of everyone? So, our tribes are, what we've made the decision is to keep fighting for the clean water and protect what we can and protect it from being more developed. So in a way, with the creation of the preserve, there were a lot of people that lived out there in addition to the indigenous people. You had a lot of non-indigenous people who were forced to leave. They were made to sell their property, or eminent domain forced them out. So in a way, the preserve kind of kept the area from being developed. Otherwise, we'd be looking at Miami all the way out here where I live. It'd be a whole urban area. So in a way, it was kind of a positive thing that the preserve did when it was created. But now with the application for oil exploration, to increase it, they're opening the door again to development in the preserve. But that's not the only issue. There's another issue, because of money and lack of funds to properly take care of the national parks and not enough funding to take care of the preserve. The preserve, which is not public knowledge, is looking at a big company to come in and build, I guess I'm going to use the word glampify, build camping sites out in the preserve. I believe about 200 of them, or a little bit more than 200. And they plan to go in and carve out sections of hardwood hammocks that are out in the Big Cypress National Preserve and clear them out, so there would be more camping opportunities. So basically, they're going to develop the preserve, make it like a Disneyland or something, in order to bring more tourists into the preserve to increase revenue to the preserve for funding.
Oh dear. Chris, I'm going to let you go ahead and ask a question so I don't forget your hands up.
You kind of asked it. I was wondering, Betty, just please put UU Miami on your mailing list so we can populate whenever you need people to protest. We're great at protesting. And again, fighting this privatization of allowing these big camping things like happened down in the Everglades National Park. They charge $95 a night to camp there in these private tents or whatever. So they're only doing it for wealthy people. But my question was similar to tell us more about what is the tribal reservation lands of the Miccosukee? How much of it is in Big Cypress, and how much of it is in, I don't know, unincorporated Everglades north of the Tamiami Trail, and how much is south of the Tamiami Trail? And then to talk a little bit more about the sacred sites, because those should all be protected from any of this oil drilling. And I also just can't imagine that oil drilling is profitable. We don't need oil. So it's a real mystery why there's an expanded drilling in Big Cypress. It's just, anyway, I mean, maybe you've talked enough about it and you're burned out, but I was, wanting a little bit more detail about your lands and the sacred lands.
Well, the federal Indian reservation, because you have Indian territory and you have federal Indian reservation. So you have the federal Indian reservation, you have a swath of it on the Tamiami Trail where the tribe has its tribal headquarters when you're traveling between Miami and Naples. And then up by I-75, we have, the tribe has a gas station on I-75. Where that gas station is, in maybe about, I think, 5 miles across east and west, and then about 3 or 4 miles north. That's on the north side of I-75. And then when you come on the south side of I-75, we have federal Indian reservation. If you later on, if you're able to go on Google Earth and see a sign, there's two canals. They're called the L-28 and the L-28 Interceptor. Where those two canals are, a swath of tribal federal, those canals are in federal Indian reservation. And there's I think, I forgot, we have over 90,000 acres up there, I think, of lands. We also have tribal land that we're putting into federal reservation status up in west of Lake Okeechobee area,
Oh,
over towards Lake Placid. We have land there. I think Highlands County, that's the county there. We have land there that's being put into trust. We also in Miami-Dade County, when you go down Chrome Avenue, I don't know if you ever heard of the 8.5 mile square area that kind of gets contentious when it comes about water issues. But anyways, off of Chrome, a little west of Chrome Avenue, in that area, we have a swath of land that we own that is being put into federal trust status. And within the Kendall area itself, the tribe owns a golf course there. That's been a legal battle to put it in trust because that community, but we own it. We own the land. And we have a golf course right there near Kendall Drive. It's just the golf course itself. And then on the Tamiami Trail and going into Miami, from 177 Avenue East into Miami, on both sides of the Southwest 8th Street, we have tribal properties that are being, I think they got trust status now. And they're about like 4 or 5 acre parcels each. I think we have about 6 or several parcels in that area. And some of the parcels the tribe leases out for agriculture, somebody, for crops.
yeah.
And in Water Conservation Area 3A, the bulk of it is tribal lease lands. When the tribe sued the state of Florida and the federal government for pollution in lands over water, out of those lawsuits, the tribe settled with the United States government and the state of Florida for over the water, and that's called the settlement agreement. So in the settlement agreement, the lease lands were created, and that's the majority of Water Conservation Area 3A. And those lease lands were created and established to be treated as a federal Indian reservation. So we have that. Also in Everglades, the entirety of Everglades National Park, the tribe views it as still their land. Even though the national park was created, a part of that, the agreement I was speaking to earlier to end the Seminole War
Yes.
is within the boundaries of Everglades National Park, so that we see that as still our lands. So basically we have a bulk of Southwest Florida that we view as our lands. And I think that seems to be the hard concept a lot of other outside individuals have understanding, because you have to go, it's like you have to backtrack and go through the different things that were established and tie them together. So the entirety of the Big Cypress National Preserve is Indian territory.
Yeah.
And Everglades National Park is Indian territory.
So let me ask if there are others that have questions. I think I have many questions, but I'm sure Chris has a few more. But are there other folks who have a question they'd like to ask Betty? All right. Let me, Janice, go ahead. Unmute yourself, Janice.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. You may have alluded to this already, but specifically, what things could people in the community do that would help support you?
Well, here, especially on the issue that that is going on within the Big Cypress National Preserve, for the 2 applications that were submitted by Burnett Oil to put in those applications, they want to put in a road. One of them is about 3 miles long, and then they want to put in a oil pad to put their oil rig. And the other application is for another site where they already have Raccoon Point that currently is a functioning oil extraction operation that about a mile, they want to put in a mile road west of that location, no, east, run it east, and put in an oil pad to put their rigs. And that specific one actually is borders right on a corner of our southwest corner of one of our the federal reservations right next to it, and next to a cultural site that we have for ceremonies. And so we've asked people on this issue to, because Tom Forsyth is the superintendent for Big Cypress National Preserve. So we're asking people to email and call him, basically give him a headache. And also to email and call Pedro Ramos that they don't agree with, that they don't want any more oil extraction to occur in the Big Cypress Preserve. Where we've asked people to even reach out to the Department of Interior, Deborah Holland, the new Indigenous person that was now the Secretary of the Department of Interior. That because remember, the Big Cypress National Preserve is federal lands. So that's under the Department of Interior. So the Department of Interior needs to be made aware by the American public that they don't want more oil extraction to occur in a federally protected preserve. Also, understanding a lot of politicians are on Twitter, not Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, but use Twitter. I've asked people to tweet about it, to create a wave of attention to it so that they have no choice but to address it. Also, we're going to be planning another action to have people show up. We're brainstorming now what exactly it's going to be. We're just like we did with this event that occurred. We're coordinating with the Center for Biological Diversity and NRDC, that's the National Resource Defense Council, to see, how to, because since we have the media attention, we want to keep that attention and keep that focus, because unfortunately it's out of sight, out of mind. So you always have to bring it back into people's mind. And we do want to do something that is easily accessible, because I know that this past action that we did was around a 8-mile hike. Not everybody can hike 8 miles in the swamp, especially when it's muddy like it was this time. But people can hold signs, and people can, make their voices heard, and they can tweet and they can email. But when we do this next thing that we want to do, we want to make it where it's, a lot of people can come and they can arrive and hold a sign. So they're not having to worry about having to walk very far. So I'm thinking that we're probably, I'm probably going to do it in front of the Big Cypress National Preserve headquarters to put attention on the preserve, because they're the ones that have to approve the application or not. Also FDEP, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, needs to be aware that the citizens here in this state don't agree with oil extraction, because there's also, I understand Florida Department of Environmental Protection had some questions that Burnett Oil had to satisfy. And there's a deadline coming up on May 12th, I believe, where the Department of Environmental Protection has to decide if what Burnett Oil provided them is sufficient for the FDEP to approve their portion of the application. So the Florida Department of Environmental Protection needs to be made aware that you don't want more oil exploration in the Big Cypress National Preserve. So we're asking people to contact FDEP as well.
Betty, I'm not sure if, I think I sent you my email at some point or another. Anytime you do
Yes.
an action, please let us know. We have bodies. I mean, we do have bodies, and we can
Yes.
bring out our bodies to be part of an action. And we do want to to give you some support. We have a few more questions. James, you have a question if you'd like to ask it. Oh, you're on mute, James.
There we go. Hi, Betty. I have two questions. First of all, in your talk today, you were referring to preserve trust and Indian trust. When they sectioned off part of your land for the preservation of the land, and which became available for them to drill for oil, are those trust agreements the same as your Indian trust agreements?
They're different.
But they're issued from the same place, the Department of Interior.
They go
wherever it
through
comes-
the same Department of Interior, but different branches of the Department of Interior, and that's what gets confusing. In the end, it's the Secretary of Interior that would need to address it either way,
So it doesn't matter
because
which
you have the
branch
big.
it was. Good.
Ultimately, it has to go to the Secretary of Interior.
Okay.
But you have the Big Cypress National Preserve. That's part under the Department of Interior, is under the section where national parks are governed, because the preserve is a part of the national park system. When you go to federal Indian reservations, that is also under the Department of Interior, but it's a different branch of the Department of Interior.
So depending on which branch writes the trust and submits it to the Interior Secretary or whatever, that's what I was kind of curious about.
Well,
but you answered my question.
Yeah, well, the Big Cypress National Preserve was created with and it was codified through legislation passed through Congress, which established that preserve. So that's not a treaty or a trust. Federal Indian reservations are in a separate trust process. And that's when you have Indian territory, acknowledged Indian territories, because when Congress established that preserve, the rights of the Miccosukees and Seminoles were codified in that language through a different process than what it took to create a federal Indian reservation.
Okay.
So in order
that's
to make
interesting to me, because
Yeah.
you're talking about a process that took away the rights of your Indians to preserve the land. And it's interesting, because if someone was trying to research the preservation rights, they're not probably looking at the process of issuing, drafting the trust. And it's interesting because it just seems like there's other parts of Florida where Miccosukees or Seminoles or whatever have already have legislation in their favor, and it's being changed by a different branch, and that's just something that's mind-boggling. I'm only asking because I have some experience in real estate. In parts of Florida, the land development companies, dealt with Indian burial right areas and things like that. The second question, it's interesting also that you say that you don't have a background for the children, the Miccosukee children, that you teach by stories. And in one of the books I've read about the West, other Indian tribes or whatever do the same thing. So my question is, for the area that's formally going to be drilled on, is there like burial grounds or sacred trees or something to your tribe that's not like flatland? Is there a story that you would teach your children about that area that's being encroached upon?
Well, we have the stories that we have creation stories on how the earth was created, but we also have historical events. When we tell our stories, when we pass an area, if there was a skirmish, like in the Seminole Wars, what occurred there, or what family lived in an area. And also if there's we're allowed to, in the cemetery, we're not even allowed to just walk into a cemetery to just go visit, a grave site without going through a lot of a ceremony. So there's areas that are or burial sites that we're told where they're at, so that we can avoid them. Because the only time we're ever supposed to go there is when we're placing someone there for burial. That's the only time we're supposed to go. So all other times we have to avoid it. So we relay that information to our young people. And so especially when they're going out there, when they learn to hunt, or if they're going out there to gather medicinal plants, that they can avoid certain areas that they're not supposed to just walk up into. And and I think that's the big difference in our culture than other cultures, is we see all of creation as sacred. It's not just we have medicinal plants that we use for healing, but for us, all life of nature is sacred. And that's what's really, I think, a very hard concept for other people to understand. Because I'm going to give an example. The Big Cypress Preserve at one time was trying to pass a rule, and they were trying to say that if an Indian tribe did not visit their ceremony or sacred site within a certain amount of years, it was considered no longer sacred. And I read it, I'm like, how can you tell an Indian tribe what is not sacred to them anymore? How can you establish, if you don't go back to this site within 4 or 5 years? It's been so many years since I read that proposed language, but they were trying to say if an Indian tribe didn't visit their sacred site within 4 or 5 years, it's no longer deemed sacred. I'm like, how can another society try what's sacred anymore? That's like me saying, that this abandoned Catholic. Yeah, I mean, how can you? I couldn't even fathom that. How can you tell another culture what is? Yeah. It was just mind-boggling. But that's how the government works.
So there's basically no landmark on the place where the trust agreement was written up for.
No, there's well, when you go to the federal reservations, they do just like you do when you do title work, when they have their the survey marks that when you research it, how it has all these boundary markers and all that, and all of that is entailed in there. When they do establish a federal a reservation, just like they have those boundary markers. Just like the creation of the Big Cypress National Preserve has its border markers, and Indian Territory is within all of that established border description.
Okay, now that you've answered my question. I was just thinking, like, you would have known right off the top of your head, like if there was a favorite oak tree that happened to be sitting on the property that was sectioned off for somebody else to drill for oil, or there been stories told about the area. But you've answered my question. I sort of understand. I wish you well. I might try to help. Reverend Tom and Chris and the other ones there. I might try to do some reading up on the preservation trusts that have been processed through the government, just see if I can find a clue as to why. Because if you protest, you're going to have a reason for protesting, other than they just took the land.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, also too, in the north, both proposed applications, and when you look at the Big Cypress Preserve, I don't know if it's on the satellite imagery, but it's called Mullet Slough. It starts on the north end of the preserve, the northwest corner of the preserve, and comes down in a southeasterly direction, and borders on to Water Conservation Area 3A. That's a big slough where historically, and it starts north of the preserve itself, but historically, when you didn't have, I-75 and all that development, that was through that slough was a flowway for water. And water at different times of year, when we have a lot of rain, the water flows through that slough, and it's a very pristine, clean water that flows through the preserve and out and continues on in, and eventually makes its way into Everglades National Park through that slough. So if you're putting in a drill pad right in that path of that slough, you're creating a point, a future potential way to contaminate the water that's coming through that slough.
Betty, I'm gonna see, I have a couple of things. First of all, Luigi, did you have a question? You had your hand up a while ago and then you put it down. Did you have Luigi, did you have a question? Well, I see his face there, but if you do,
Hi.
Hi.
I was trying to unmute and couldn't do it.
okay.
I did have a question, but it seems so trivial because we've been talking about all these serious things. I was wondering if Betty could point me in the direction of a good fry bread, Miccosukee fry bread recipe.
It's only flour and water, self-rising flour and water, only 2 ingredients. It's like making biscuits. If you over it comes out tough. We only use, other tribes have this elaborate, ingredients, list of ingredients, but for us, it's only water and self-rising flour, 2 ingredients.
Nice.
So Chris has a question, but I'm going to ask one more thing, and then I'll head to Chris here. What I've noticed, and this is not just with you, Betty, but with all the Indigenous peoples that we've talked to, is kind of it's kind of a disconnect that I think that you all have to live, and that is you have this earth-based spirituality that really grounds you to the land and to the planet, to the beauty, to the life, and then you have this other part where you've had to, in order to defend yourself, learn the language and laws and particular culture around land management and in order to protect yourself, so that I heard this very clearly as you were talking at the beginning, Betty, about how much the land means to you and the creator, and then as we got further in, how you've had to kind of learn all this, these laws and policies and how to get the land back into trust. It just seems like it would take a toll on you having to be both. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and it gets exhausting sometimes. I'm up at midnight or 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning trying to read, and especially if there's deadlines where where comment has to be submitted, because I serve on my tribe's Everglades Advisory Committee, and part of that obligation is to, when there's these environmental impact statements that come out, is to help read them. The tribe employs scientists, but they're not going to read a document with Indigenous eyes. So, while they're addressing the science part, and I've had to, try to, and even doing this for so many years, getting that education through that process and learning the science in order to help the tribe put together their, so that we can put it to the tribal government, our leaders to sign off on, to send them in as official comments. And it does get exhausting. And, and my I have grandkids, and I mentioned earlier, I'm a great grandmother now, but there's times that my grandkids ask me, Grandma, when are you going to be a normal grandma? I'm like, okay. I ask myself that too. When am I going to have time to be just grandma?
Or just a Miccosukee, or a Seminole. I think it's just to be able to prize that part of yourself without having to fight the fight that you have to continue to fight. Chris, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, I want to tell all my Unitarian Universalist friends here that I will Wright, Tom Forsyth, Pedro Ramos, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Deputy Haglund of the Department of Interior, and send you guys my letters and how to add yours so that we can, follow up. Janice had asked Betty what to do, and I'll find all those addresses to help that. I'll see if we can fundraise a bit or ask people to donate to the Center for Biological Diversity and the National Resource Defense Fund so that they can continue to stop additional oil drilling. But I guess my question for Betty is, we are, as a congregation, we are trying to develop a way to expose our children and youth to Florida's sacred ecosystems, and try to have them to have an awareness of the land stewardship that has been done by the Miccosukee and Seminole neighbors that we live amongst. Do you have any suggestions for how we could do that in a good way to expose our children and youth?
Well, what I've done is, because I'm also run the late William Buffalo Tiger, after he left chairmanship, started his airboat tour company. And before he died, my late husband and I, because he was my late husband's uncle, we took over the operation of his business. So through the airboat, the one thing Buffalo had asked us to do when we took over is to continue his mission. And his mission was to educate the public about, the importance of protecting the environment, and also to educate about the Miccosukee of what we're allowed to share. So I do that. And I have a adopted nephew who's actually a biologist. So we started at the end of last year, we started what we call Indigenous science tours. We have myself, the Miccosukee, that can tell about, our connection to the land and what my tribe and Seminole tribe have been doing to protect the land. And from the science standpoint, since he's a biologist, he throws in some of the, the scientific facts of, what goes on in the environment. So we have the Indigenous science tours that we either through hiking or canoeing, kayaking, or, out in the airboat and tribal lands, whichever way that the individuals want to experience the environment and also get that education. We started doing that at the end of last year.
That sounds perfect for
That might be something.
kid.
So we've got.
Yeah, for the kayaking portion, we usually go down Turner River. If they want to see the tree islands and learn about the importance of why water quality and the importance of not flooding, we usually go out into the tribal islands that we use and bring the kids out there and have the talk with them, and they can have their lunch and everything. And for the hiking portion, we usually do that in the Big Cypress National Preserve.
And what's the name of the airboat company?
Buffalo Tiger.
Buffalo Tiger.
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 Okay. So Ray, you have a question, and then we have one more question. I think that'll be as much as we're able to do tonight. I want to thank you, Betty, for being with us, but so we have two more questions. Ray, you've got one, and then Sam has one, and we'll bring it to a close. Okay.
Yes, I understand that this is recorded. I have a friend who could be very helpful to the cause. And is there a way to get a link to the Zoom so he can view it?
Oh, yes. I will send that to you. I'm going to be putting it on our YouTube page so that it can be accessed. And Betty, if you want to send anybody to hear tonight your presentation, it'll be on our YouTube page after we get finished here. Betty, I have one more question for you from one of our members. They wanted to know if the Miccosukee is predominantly a maternal or paternal society.
Maternal. The teachings is passed down through the mother. There's the responsibility of the mother's family. And also we have a clan system. I'm of the Panther clan I mentioned earlier. So you get your clan through your mother.
Wow, thank you very much. There's a lot of thumbs up for that. So Betty, I just want to tell you that it has been a privilege to spend this evening with you. We appreciate your time, and please do keep in touch. We are happy to support the issues that you all face, and want to know you have an ally here. All right.
Thank you for having me. And once we finalize what it is we're gonna do, I'll put it I'll put it out on Facebook, but I'll make sure to include you and send you a message so you'll be able to share that with everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have a couple of final notes for everybody else here. Nick, I don't have a speaker for next month, but we are gonna, Chris and I are gonna take charge of a couple of chapters in the book, Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, and talk a little bit about that. If I do get a speaker, we'll have that. But right now, we want to talk about, so what are you going to talk about, Chris? You're going to have to unmute first.
Doctrine of Discovery, the problems with this idea that white people discovered anything.
I don't know if we discovered anything. Anyway, so I'll have that information out to you, and I'll send that out through all the emails that we've accumulated for this class. My intent, and I want to ask this in our next class, is if we wish to continue this in the fall, and if we do, that'll give me, I'll have plenty of time to begin lining up speakers for September, October, November. And so be thinking about that. If this has been a useful course, if you found yourself to find some insight in it and usefulness in your life, we'll make those decisions next time we meet. So thank you all very much for being here tonight, and I wish you all well, and take good care. Good night.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. Excellent.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. It's been
Bye-bye.
very
Thank you to a bunch of
interesting.
my friends for joining.
Yay.